Good morning, one and all. Finally, we are on the last day of our IPSECON conference. Without any further delay, we'll start our first session. Now, I welcome you all for the Satvahana Award poster session. Dr. Suresh Badamat and Dr. Shivaram Varampalli will chair the session. I welcome Dr. Suresh Badamat to take the dais. Dr. Suresh Badamat.
Already on the dais.
Thank you, sir. Professor of Psychiatry, Head of Forensic Psychiatry, Head of the Telemedicine Center, Head of an Unit 5 and Consultant Community Psychiatry, NIMHANS, Bangalore. PhD in Law and has earned degrees related to medical ethics and human rights. 333 publications in national and international journals, including 11 books. Indian Psychiatric Society, Professor Raghuram's Distinguished Young Teacher Award. Dr. C.V. Raman, Young Scientist Award in the medical field given by the Government of Karnataka. I welcome you, sir. Now I welcome Dr. Shivaram Varampalli to take the dais. You're already on the dais and I welcome you again, sir. Thank you. Dr. Shivaram Varampalli, Professor of Psychiatry and the first head Department of Integrative Medicine, NIMHANS, Bangalore. He has received the prestigious doctorate in science in yoga. I welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Welcome all the participants. So as per the rules, you will be given 3 minutes to present and 2 minutes for discussion. And 3+2 is what the organizers have said. And there will be negative marking if you go beyond 3 minutes. So I request Shivaram to add.
Yeah, I think some are offline and some are online. We are going in this order. In this.
You can call anybody.
Because there are 1, 2, 3,
Total
5
50.
offline.
First we'll start with the first person.
Offline, alla?
Yeah, Ramesh is
Dr. Ramesh S.N., Tanjavur Medical College.
Yes. Shall I start, sir? Very good morning to everyone gathered here. My poster is about prevalence, association of type D personality with suicidality and functional impairment among the first-time suicide attempters in a tertiary care center. So the introduction for regarding suicides, the adjusted annual suicide rate is 10.5 per 1 lakh population in India, and NCRB data says Tamil Nadu state ranks second with 17.8 per 1 lakh population. Studies on predictors of suicide are still evolving, and I choose type D personality, which is described by Denolet as a distressed personality which consists of simultaneous occurrence of two things. One is negative affectivity and second is social inhibition. So is there any link between type D and suicidality? Yes, because type D has increased vulnerability to emotional distress, and also they are typically characterized by avoidant coping disposition and passive attitude that leads to poor problem solving, feeling as entrapped, and suicide as an escape. So my objectives is to study prevalence and association of type D with suicidality 1, and second is functional impairment among the first-time suicide attempters, and compared with the healthy control. So I choose it as a comparative and case control study. 50 first-time suicide attempters, 18 to 40 years age, 50 healthy controls screened by general health questionnaire and item number 9 PHQ for suicidal ideation, and I applied DS14 type D personality questionnaire and work social adjustment scale questionnaire for both the groups. And my results, the case and controls were socio-demographically matched. So one result is the prevalence of this type D personality among the cases, I mean first-time suicide attempters, it was around 40%. Among the healthy controls, it was around 22%. And there is a significant correlation between type D personality and the suicide attempters, which is 0.049 and statistically significant. And second aim is functional impairment. Yes, there is a significant impairment, but less severe symptomatology in around 50% of the cases and 45% among the controls. So this is shown in a better graph because 40% among the first-time suicide attempts is associated with type D personality traits. And also, I also found that alcohol use is found to be 53.3% among the type D personality and only in 22.8 among the non-type D personality. So I come to the discussion. Type D personality is found in significant proportion, 1, and it has a robust link. So it highlights the role of negative affectivity and social inhibition apart from the impulsivity. And 3, it has a significant association between type D and alcoholism because that patients have scored, that controls have scored high in social inhibition as a relieving factor, they use alcohol. So nearly 50% have significant functional impairment but not statistically significant. So it needs a larger sample. So considering all these things, my study may contribute to the literature that preventive mental health policies for the prevention of suicide may foster emotional intelligence and coping skills to reduce the negative affectivity and social inhibition in order to prevent the suicides in further. And these are my references. That's my poster. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So this type D personality is a fairly recent thing in the history of personality disorders. Has any such study been done before outside?
Yes, sir. Type D personality is actually found by Denolet in 2005, and he found in general population of in Netherlands population, and it was around 18 to 24%. And in India, it was done by Dr. Vikas Menon in Zipmer study in CAD patients, and he was found at around 24% in CAD patients alone. And also in Uttar Pradesh, among the medical students, I think it is dental students, and it was found around 24%, nearly around this range. But it was not, in India, it was not found, it was not performed in the general population. So I chose, it may be helpful in general population, taking as healthy control, and I compared with the suicidality patients also.
So, no, what I am asking is, in the international literature, is there a link with suicide which has been demonstrated?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a robust link. It was again done by Denolet. It was the paper is released in 2020, but he's passed away in 2019. That was a meta-analysis report which he found a robust link between type D and suicidality.
So your researcher hypothesis was upheld or the null hypothesis in your study?
Sir, I see it is there is association.
But you said no significant difference.
No, sir. That is for the functional impairment, type D personality and functional impairment. Because the sample is very small, I couldn't find, as the type D personality has two things, right?
Now my question was, did your study find or not?
Sir?
Did your study find?
Yes, sir. My study find a significant association between type D and suicidality.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any questions from the audience?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Apart from the original proposer of the type D personality, the literature is not very scant across. So validation of the D personality, is it complete? That's my question to you.
Yes, sir. Validation in Indian population is completed, sir. Factor
No,
structure
no, no.
and validation of this.
The concept of D personality itself, is it validated? Because this is one person, his meta-analysis, and then that same scale is being used. Not has been done for a validation. See, it has to be totally independent. In Netherlands population, we can understand.
Yes, sir. There is a paper, sir. DS14 questionnaire has been validated for Indian culture. You can show, sir.
Okay, thank you, man.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Next, I think, is online. Dr. Sharmi Jipmer, Puducherry.
Sir, I think she has some connectivity issues. We can go for the next client and she'll join us later, sir.
Yeah, next one is Dr. P. Shakti Prakash, Stanley Medical College. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good morning to everyone. My poster for presentation is bipolarity in Tourette. Tourette is a syndrome with a combination of multiple motor tics and one or more vocal tics. The most common neuropsychiatric comorbidity associated with tics are ADHD and compulsive OCD and depression. And in our study, with our presentation of bipolarity, so we have presented here. So the case description is a 13-year-old studying in 9th standard reported with his mother complaints of repetitive involuntary movements of both upper limb, repetitive touching of some articles of daily uses, and repetitive movements of lip and reduced communication for the past 9 months. And the symptom has progressed in the form of repetitive movements of both upper limb, waving of hands, point count something, moving his hands side to side, and associated with foot tapping, standing on tiptoe, beating others without any provocation. It is absent during sleep, does also not explain this action. Patient is also touches the same article repeatedly, found to be taking long time for bath, It was noticed that he was touching the pipe bucket handle repeatedly. While studying also, he used to take long time for taking the book out of his bag because he was touching and repeatedly positioning the bag straps. He also found to touching door handles, chapels, arranging it orderly. While using phone also, he was scanning over the keypads and touching corners of the phone. While eating also, he used to arrange the food grains in the corner of the plate and he would eat. On questioning is regarding behavior, you would get repeated thoughts about these actions. The patient also repeated movements of limb while he was trying to say same words. We used to repeat the same words of different questions asked by the parents. His family members also noticed he was using obscene words without any provocation. Also, the family members decreased communication for the first 9 months. There is no significant past history. On mental status examination, they found a complex motor tic, vocal tic, paralalia, coprolalia, and compulsive behavior touching same articular scene. So we started an tetraline 25 mg 1 OD for OCD symptoms and tablet allopurinol was started. And further investigated, there was no organicity was found out. But suddenly, within 4 days of starting the sertraline, he presented with symptoms of excessive talk, over familiarity, singing, dancing, present with manic symptoms. So we stopped at sertraline and started on sodium valproate and tablet arabidol. Following that, his tic symptoms and his panic symptoms are got reduced. Here, the treatment of comorbid disorders in patients with Tourette syndrome is important as a treatment of tic disorder. In this case, the rare comorbid BPID was presented. We need to evaluate carefully. Treating a Tourette with OCD with serotonin reuptake inhibitor can precipitate mania, which leads to problem in patient progress. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, what kind of bipolarity is this? Because you are saying that it came after gave antidepressant.
So, it's a antidepressant pop out.
Pop out. So, in the bipolar, there is 1, 2, 3,
Oh.
isn't it?
Yes.
Although traditionally we call bipolar if there are 2 episodes, some people can stay bipolar, but your case actually is antidepressant induced mania in a patient with Tourette.
With Tourette.
Isn't it? I wish you had given that description, that would be a little more clear. Was there past history of hypomania or anything? In
No,
this
sir,
person?
no significant in
Nothing
past
at all.
history.
Okay. You should take care, man. You have misspelled bipolarity in your title slide. You should be more careful with your title slide.
What is your line of management? Suppose mania is uncontrollable, or whenever you give SSRI for OCD, there is a switch. What is your line of management usually? In such cases, especially in this.
So we, in this case, we have started with a mood stabilizer, sodium valproate, sir.
Apart from that,
So we can give second generation antipsychotics,
next,
olanzapine.
next, what are the other management plan you will have in this case?
So in this case, we have all stopped the SSRIs and maintain on only
See,
in moods.
there are 2 issues. One is bipolarity and also there is OCD. So what are the other management you would like to consider?
So the antipsychotics, second generation antipsychotics may take over the control of OCD symptoms and also the.
Okay, antipsychotics, no improvement. Next. Any psychosocial management?
What psychological input would be useful?
So here we can give cognitive behavioral therapy.
That's it, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So Dr. Sharmi has joined, it seems.
Ready?
We can ask.
Yeah, please. Dr. Sharmi, please go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir? Am I audible?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, madam, please go ahead. We can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to present on my thesis titled Effect of Text Message Reminders on Treatment Retention Rates Among Outpatients with First Episode Psychosis, a randomized controlled trial. Sorry, sir, I'm not able to change this slide. High treatment attrition rates are a major issue in first episode psychosis, resulting in poor clinical outcomes such as relapse and hospitalization. mHealth interventions could be a cost-effective strategy to improve treatment retention in first episode psychosis, especially in research in resource poor settings. In this study, we aim to assess the efficacy of mobile-based text message reminders versus treatment as usual on treatment retention rates and socio-occupational functioning. The primary objective of our study was to evaluate the effect of text message reminders on treatment retention rates among outpatients with first episode psychosis at the end of 3-month follow-up. The secondary objective was to determine the effect of text-based reminders on social and occupational functioning among the same group. Moving on to methodology, about 30 outpatients aged 18 to 50 years with first episode psychosis were randomized into 2 groups to receive either treatment as usual or adjunctive twice weekly text message reminders. Randomization was done using stratified permitted block design, and allocation and concealment was carried out by an independent person. The proportion of patients remaining in treatment at the end of 12 weeks was evaluated together with rated blinded assessment of socio-occupational functioning, which was obtained at baseline and 12 weeks. Moving on to results, the mean age of the sample was 31.9 plus or minus 8.7 years, and males constituted about 43% of the sample. When Chi-Sky was performed for the primary objective, as you can see, a greater proportion of patients in the intervention group remained in the treatment at the end of study, although the difference was not statistically significant. Analysis of covariance was performed for change in socio-occupational functioning scores to determine the effect of group assignment on these outcomes while simultaneously controlling for baseline scores. Also, the intervention was not associated with a significant change in functioning scores at the end of the study in the completer analysis. Moving on to discussion, thus these findings indicate that a low intensity, low burden short messaging service intervention may be a promising strategy for improving treatment retention rates in first episode psychosis and merit examination in a larger adequately powered sample. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharmi.
Yes, sir.
From what I heard, you say you said that you did not actually get any significant result.
Yes, sir, but around 15 patients, there were like 15 patients in the intervention group and 15 in the control group, sir.
Yeah.
Among 15 patients, around 9 patients stayed throughout the end of the study period, sir. Like
Yeah.
when compared, only 5 people.
No, that is why we have statistics, madam. We can't, now if out of 15, 9 is there,
Yes,
is
sir.
there 15 was there any sample size calculation prior to the study?
Yes, sir, there was, sir, but due to COVID, we couldn't meet the expected sample size, sir. So we went ahead with whatever numbers we got, sir.
Right. So in such small numbers, talking of a completer analysis actually doesn't make a lot of sense. What was the statistics that you used?
For primary objective, sir.
Yeah.
Chi-square test, sir.
Okay, right. Yes, sir.
I'm Dr. Prasad from the Madurai. I have one question. How do you know whether the individual has really seen the text message? Maybe it's WhatsApp, maybe it is whatever the message. Do you have anything which you correlated? Because that's an important variable. You send a message, but we don't know whether they have seen or not.
Yes,
Because
sir.
that is the only variable which you are testing.
Yes, sir. The patients usually come for follow-up, sir, and we then question them if they had got the text message, sir. When they come for the next visit.
Right. What was the original sample size you wanted actually, Sharmi?
Sir, we wanted about 180, sir.
Oma. Then.
But actually, we wanted a sample where they actually come to our hospital for the first time. Being JIPMA being a tertiary care hospital, most of them we were difficult to meet that particular population, sir.
All right.
That's why we couldn't get that many numbers.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Okay.
The next one again is online. Aishwarya Rao, St. John's Medical College.
Dr. Aishwarya Rao? Yeah. Your time starts, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Aishwarya, you can start.
From my side.
Ma'am, you are not
So
audible.
should I share this?
Yes, yes, please. Yeah, please go ahead, madam.
Are my slides visible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yes. My case series is restarting neuroleptics and neuroleptic malignant syndrome. Introduction: neuroleptic malignant syndrome is an idiosyncratic, rare, life-threatening side effect of antipsychotics and agents which affect central dopaminergic neurotransmission. A major challenge is to control the underlying psychiatric condition while treating NMS. There is limited literature on when to start the offending agent and the consequent outcome in NMS. There are no clear-cut guidelines for rechallenge. Our case series focuses on the clinical profile, rechallenge of antipsychotics, and outcomes in 3 patients with NMS. Coming to the case series, the first case is of a 19-year-old female who presented to us with mania without psychotic symptoms, and she was antipsychotic naive with nil comorbidities. The offending agent was, she was started on tablet risperidone and tablet lithium 900 mg. 1 week after starting this, she came to our emergency with clinical features of NMS, following which these agents were stopped immediately. We tried to rechallenge her on tablet lithium 300 mg on day 10 of presentation when her CPK values had fallen down from about 2000 to 91 liters per unit, which she tolerated it well. We also titrated the dose to 900 mg. We also tried starting her on tablet quetiapine 100 mg on day 20 of presentation, which was not tolerated as we saw rigidity and it was stopped immediately. The second case is of a 19-year-old male with a diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder, current episode mania without psychotic symptoms. He was already on tablet lithium, divalproate, and risperidone when he presented to us. He had a comorbidity of mild mental retardation. In view of agitation, he was given injection haloperidol 5 mg in the OPD, following which we noticed the symptoms of NMS the next day. We tried to rechallenge him on tablet oxcarbazepine 300 mg on day 5 of presentation when his CPK values had fallen down from 1000 to 187, and which he tolerated, and the dose was titrated to 1500. We tried rechallenging olanzapine on day 9 of presentation, which was tolerated and titrated to 20 mg. And we also tried to restart him on tablet lithium 300 mg on day 13 of admission. The third case is of a 68-year-old male who presented to us with paranoid schizophrenia. The offending agent was haloperidol 5 mg and tablet olanzapine was restarted on day 30 of admission, which was tolerated efficiently. A discussion literature review states that rechallenge may be more successful in those patients with 5 to 14 days of presentation of neuroleptic absence, and outcome is not related to age, sex, and number of neuroleptic agents employed, and the structural class selection and rates of recurrence may vary up to 30%. We stopped all neuroleptic agents once we noticed the symptoms of NMS and ensured adequate hydration. We rechallenged the patients once the acute symptoms had subsided and the CPK values were under normal range, with constant monitoring of CPK values, looking out for symptoms of EPS, and ensuring adequate hydration. This case series highlights the rechallenging of neuroleptics in patients with various clinical profiles, different clinical presentation and outcome. However, it is limited to only 3 cases. Conclusion, we conclude that
You have exceeded your time, madam. I'll stop you there.
yes, sir.
So this rechallenge, actually, you're not rechallenging with the same agent. You're actually rechallenging with another antipsychotic, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, all three of your cases, of 2 of
Yes.
them, you are able to rechallenge. 1, it was not possible. That's your finding, isn't it?
One we challenged lithium she tolerated, sir, whereas
But lithium,
quetiapine she could
no, lithium,
tolerate.
is it known to cause NMS? Why do you say
Yes, sir,
lithium?
it is known to.
Lithium?
It is known to cause NMS, sir.
Okay.
There are various case reports which
Okay, tell me the mechanism of NMS. Hope you heard.
NMS is usually, it occurs, yes, sir, dopaminergic system. If there is any withdrawal of D2 receptors, if there is any sudden withdrawal of D2 receptors, NMS it can lead to NMS.
Very good. How does lithium acts? Mechanism of lithium action.
So lithium acts at a cell level, sir, and
You said lithium causes
But the-
NMS. So you tell me.
the lithium can potentiate the action of antipsychotics if we give it with antipsychotics, which when we due to which in our case she was started on risperidone and lithium together. So probably that could have led to NMS is what we are thinking.
Okay, thank you, Aishwarya.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Next, I think Dr. Kevin Nishal, Christian Medical College, Vellore. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Good morning, everyone. My case report is on olanzapine-induced venous thromboembolism, a case report. So venous thromboembolism is a very rarely occurring disease in the population, but however, in the occurrence with antipsychotics is highly increased. Current evidence is not very clear on whether first generation or second generation increases the risk of venous thromboembolism. Other risk factors identified are young age, first 3 months within onset of antipsychotics, high doses of antipsychotics, polypharmacy and injectables. The biological mechanism again is not very clear. So we had a 29-year-old male who came to us in April who presented with acute psychosis. We had started him on olanzapine. He had only partial response, so we had to augment with chlorpromazine, and with which he had complete remission of symptoms. 1 month later, he developed severe swelling in the left thigh, and also 2 days later, he developed breathlessness, for which he had to be taken to the emergency department, where he was diagnosed with DVT and pulmonary embolism. So after ruling out all other causes of thrombosis, he was diagnosed with olanzapine-induced psychosis. So moving on to the discussion, so early identification of DVT and pulmonary embolism actually helped limit the morbidity in this patient. The risk factors in this patient include that he was actually a young male, 29-year-old. He was in the early phase of treatment, especially within the first 3 months of initiating antipsychotic. And he was also on a combination of drugs, and both these drugs were also at a high dose. Multiple hypotheses have been suggested for why antipsychotics cause venous thromboembolism. They are probably weight gain, sedation, enhanced platelet aggregation, increased level of anti-phospholipid antibodies, hyperprolactinemia or hyperhomocystinemia. But however, again, it's not very clear if antipsychotics per se induce thrombotic state, or is it the effect of antipsychotics like increased sedation or immobility which causes a prothrombotic state. So in conclusion, antipsychotic medication is actually an independent risk of venous thromboembolism, and clinicians must be aware of this association and also the risk factors of these. The risk needs to be assessed for every patient individually, and preventive measures that have to be followed are to improve the overall physical health, especially the cardiac health of the patient, and also regular physical exercise of the lower extremities, and also to ensure adequate hydration so that they don't go into dehydration. So the further research needs to be focused on understanding the mechanism through which this happens, and also the quantification of risk for an individual, and also to intervention study to find out the potential benefits of venous thromboembolism prophylaxis in a patient who has been started on antipsychotics. These are my references. Thank you.
Kevin, are you aware of any standardized ways to look at what is the cause of adverse effect? There are actually specific scales for that, to say that this was caused by this agent, how to rule out. Any, you read about that?
No, sir, I am not aware of it.
Okay. Yeah, the most famous one is the Naranjo scale, which will give you a how much is likely that this particular agent has caused this, right? So you should try to apply it in this.
What were the tests done to rule out the thrombosis, other causes of thrombosis?
So he was done, the complete thrombotic workup was done, also the metabolic workup and the connective tissue workup like antiphospholipid antibody, homocysteine levels were all done to rule out any other cause of thrombosis.
It doesn't cover all causes, only few causes you mentioned. Any other causes?
Only these were done, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Any other questions from audience? No. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Shanteri Pai, online I think, Dharwad Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. Yeah, Shanteri, you can go ahead. We can't hear you, yeah? Your audio is not working.
Ma'am, unmute your mic.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
I am Dr. Shanteri Pai R from Demands, Dharwad. I am presenting poster on the topic Medico-Legal, Psychosocial and Financial Adversities of Internet Gaming Disorder, Case Series and Review of Literature. To introduce the topic, Internet Gaming Disorder was first explicitly explained as a valid diagnostic entity in DSM-5. It is characterized by recurring and persistent use of video games, frequently played with others, with endorsement of at least 5 out of 9 clinical criteria in last 12 months. The prevalence being 1.3 to 19.9% among adolescents with male preponderance. It can differ with age, class of study, availability of smartphone with internet facilities. IGD is not only related to stimulation by game itself, but also to personality traits of the players, which can be explained by stress diathesis behavioral model. Coming to the first case, it is a 25-year-old male literate under trial prisoner with history of playing games since 15 years, having psychosocial impacts such as decreased social interaction, dropout from college, multiple DSH attempts by slashing wrist. The medico-legal consequence faced was that patient's father snatched his smartphone while latter was deeply engrossed in playing PUBG. In retaliation, he impulsively assaulted father by chopping off his head and leg, leading to death. On evaluation, there was depressed mood, average intelligence, dissocial and emotionally unstable personality disorder on IPDE, and internet gaming disorder score of 38. The second case is of 23-year-old female graduate with history of ADHD in childhood, with history of playing PUBG since 5 years, with comorbid epilepsy and bilateral PCOD. The psychosocial impact here was similar with interpersonal issues, irregularity at workplace, multiple DSH attempt. The medico-legal consequence was aggression towards family and harm to property. She was also a victim of cyber crime in which she was threatened for money to play online games, causing a loss of about Rs 45 lakhs. On evaluation, there were multiple hesitation cuts, irritable mood on MSc, average intelligence and emotionally unstable PD borderline type on IPDE, and internet gaming disorder score of 39. The third case was of a 16-year-old male studying in 10th standard with history of nicotine dependence since 3 to 4 years, history of playing PUBG since 1.5 years since lockdown. The psychosocial issues faced were frequent quarrels and academic decline. The medico-legal consequence was that the patient attempted suicide by coming under a moving train and was rescued by the onlookers. On evaluation, there was depressed mood, average intelligence, slow to warm up temperament, and internet gaming disorder score of 28. To conclude, our case series highlights various facets of life being impaired due to internet gaming disorder presenting with homicide, suicide and financial loss, and/or comorbid personality disorder rendering serious medico-legal, socio-economic and clinical concerns. Temperamental and personality traits can act as early predictors of internet gaming disorder during childhood and adolescence. Hence, evaluation of these risk factors in predisposing or maintenance of internet gaming disorder and their role in impulsive act needs to be assessed in larger studies. The preventive measures could be early recognition of addictive gaming, restriction of screen time to specific hours, and strict parental monitoring of internet use using Wi-Fi controls and game day. The policy implications are school mental health programs to create awareness among students, teachers, and parents regarding the risk involved with the overuse of internet for gaming purpose and restricting games with violent theme with dangerous tasks across the country. These are my references. Thank you.
Okay, your title, can you go back to the title, ma?
Yes, sir. Sir, can I read it out? I am unable to share the screen, sir. It is the medico-legal, psychosocial and financial adversities of internet gaming disorder.
Okay, what are the medico-legal issues you mentioned in the first case, second case, third case? So what is the medico-legal issue in the first case? He has murdered his father. So
Yes, sir.
what is the
Homicide of his
medico-legal
father.
issue in this case?
There was homicide of his father, sir, following which he was brought for evaluation to us.
So here insanity defense is given, not given. What will be, under which section he will be charged, under which act he will be punished? Which legislation he will be punished?
IPC section 302 for homicide, sir.
Okay.
Culpable.
Suppose you want, if you are the lawyer, which section you will use to defend him?
Insanity.
Which section? Yeah, insanity defense, which one?
The McNaughton's rule and the IPC section.
Okay, section 84 IPC. Okay, tell me, can you tell me what is section 84 IPC says?
During the commitment of the act, whether the person was, I'm unable to recall it.
Okay, it's because of the reason of unsoundness of mind. He does not know the nature of
Unsoundness
the act.
of mind. Yes, sir.
He does not know the nature of the act, consequences of the act, and or contrary to the law. Okay,
Yes, sir.
so when you prepare, you have to make some efforts to read what are the, because your title comes with medico legal.
Yes, sir.
So invariably, you have to be prepared.
Yes.
Any questions, Shura? Any questions from the audience? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Divya Shri.
Good morning, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Good morning. I am Dr. Divya Shri NS, PG student from DeMans, Harvard. My topic is media usage and its association with psychological distress in primary caregivers of inpatients with COVID-19. Introduction. In the background of COVID pandemic, acquiring knowledge regarding pandemic is on the rise. Increased exposure to disaster-related news in media may predispose to psychological distress in a vulnerable population. Evidence suggests that symptoms of anxiety, depression, and disturbed sleep are common psychological reaction to the COVID pandemic. An online questionnaire by Reem et al. Found that increased time spent on social media to learn about COVID were associated with increased mental distress. Aims and objectives were to study the media usage regarding COVID-related information among primary caregivers of inpatients with COVID bronchopneumonia, to study associated socio-demographic correlates and its association to psychological distress. Methodology, it was a single-center cross-sectional descriptive study conducted at DeMans COVID Hospital. Predesigned proforma was used to collect socio-demographic details and in COVID-19 pandemic mental health questionnaire to assess personal and social consequences of the COVID. Results, out of 92 participants, majority were males and belonged to less than 40 years of age. As the number of years of education increased, participants strongly agreed that they tried to deliberately control the media usage and avoid news about COVID. Spouses of patients and caregivers of those with severe CT severity researched more compared to children, siblings, and than those with moderate CT severity. No significant association with other socio-demographic data, day of evaluation, and past history of psychiatric illness with media usage was noted. Coming to psychological distress versus media usage, participants who researched less about the COVID-19 pandemic denied having avoided external reminders and denied suffering from severe anxiety attacks. Those who try to deliberately control the media usage and those who try to avoid COVID news and notifications experience significant sleep disturbances. Participants who succeeded in controlling media consumption around COVID felt less burdened by the pandemic and by being in the quarantine. Those who felt burdened by media images or news reports about COVID felt excessive urge to wash or disinfect hands again and again. Those who were able to mentally distance themselves from the news and notifications about COVID felt less burdened by worries about health and worries of contracting COVID. Conclusion, media usage and inability to mentally distance from the news about COVID is associated with anxiety, avoidance behavior, sleep disturbance, and perceived stress of pandemic or quarantine among primary caregivers. This vulnerable population requires attention and psychological evaluation to ensure comprehensive care of the affected family. Strengths, to our knowledge, first study from India, we conducted direct interview. Limitations, higher sample size and multicentric study would have greater generalizability. Caregivers of ICU admitted patients were not included. Media type was not assessed. Causal association of whether distress leads to media usage or vice versa was not ascertained. Future directions, multicentric follow-up studies of primary caregivers are required, and the period during hospitalization can be utilized to carry out brief psychological intervention to address the distress. Thank you.
Excellent study, Ma. Very good. Highly relevant to the pandemic situation, because we may get next pandemic another 40 or 50 years down the line. You have done a study which is required at this time. But
Thank you.
can I understand what is primary caregiver? The patient and the family member were staying together in the ward, or caregiver was outside?
Primary caregiver is the one who provides support to the patient financially and emotionally, and the patient is dependent on the primary caregiver. The primary patient was admitted, sir. Caregiver was staying outside the ward.
Okay, he is outside the ward. Okay.
Yes, sir.
What is Werther effect? Related to media and suicide. What is Werther effect? What is Papigin effect?
The person who is very famous, if he commits suicide, then
Very good. That is Werther effect.
there are some more suicides. Those people who follow them also
That is called
blindly
as,
follow.
very good. That is called as copycat suicide. That is
Yes, sir.
Werther effect. If the media highlights the suicide, then there
Yes,
will be.
sir.
That is Werther effect. Papigin effect?
Yes. Sir, not. Can you repeat the question? Sorry, sir.
Papigino effect. It is
No, sir,
opposite
I
of
don't.
Werther effect. If the media does a good job on how to report suicide and tell the preventive methods, suicide comes down.
Okay, sir.
But excellent
Thank-
study. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Are you planning to publish this, Ma? Because it seems
Yes.
like you have a. Are you still continuing that, or you have stopped at 92?
We have stopped at 92, sir. Our demands is a tertiary psychiatric hospital.
I know, I know.
So during the second wave of the pandemic, we had treated COVID patients, sir. During that time, we have conducted this study, so it is stopped now, sir.
You should connect it with what Dr. Suresh was saying and then try to publish it, Ma. Very good.
Sure, sir. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, SRM Medical College, Tamil Nadu. He's also
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, Miller, go ahead.
I'll share the screen.
Yes, yes.
So is my slide visible?
You can go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
Yes.
I'll start. My case series is on impacts of COVID-19 lockdown on children and their mental health. This is my abstract introduction. Most of the COVID-19 lockdown were very limiting. The prolonged closure of school and lockdown at home can cause drastic effects on the mental health of children. Quarantine itself can cause variety of negative consequences of mental health of the child. Along with the novel virus outbreak, more anxiety and uncertainty were prevalent among all ages. School plays an essential role in growth and development of child's cognitive, emotional, social, and psychological makeup. With lockdown extending for months, schools remained closed and children were confined to their home. They lacked a proper routine and also very minimal interaction with anyone other than their family. Most age-appropriate behavior were taken out of context and were described in a pathological sense. I here describe 3 cases. First case is an 8-year-old boy studying 3rd grade in a private school was brought by his mother. Complaints were gaze avoidance, especially with his mother, sudden crying spells without any reason, repeatedly saying that he is not a good boy and refusal to attend online classes. Detailed history showed that after lockdown, he was always at home. He was not allowed to go out and play or interact with anyone. And his school also started online academic classes from July 2020. He would attend online classes for 2 hours a day, and he was allowed to use a smartphone for 2 hours a day. One day while browsing, he accidentally stumbled upon a mermaid picture. His immediate reaction was the picture was fear with curiosity. Gradually, whenever he saw his mother or any other lady, he would start getting the thoughts of that mermaid picture. Upon looking his mother's hips or the hips of any other woman, he started to get distressed. He would begin to cry and would state that he shouldn't look at those parts of women. This resulted in him saying that he's a bad boy and he would cry even more due to this. This not only distressed the child, but the whole family was distressed. The second case is, again, an 8-year-old boy who was brought by his mother with complaints of lack of interaction with everyone as well as the family. In spite of him having a normal speech and language development till 3 years of age, his interaction in school gradually decreased. He eventually stopped interacting even with his family members. After lockdown, he also stayed at home with his family. He did not have any siblings. He would continuously watch TV and he was not allowed to go out and play. And there was no form of peer interaction. As the lockdown extended, his mother noticed that his interaction with family also started declining. And for the past 1 month, the child stopped talking completely with everyone. And this caused the mother to worry excessively about the nature of his problem. Though this can be a developmental disorder, the effect of lockdown had on the child is one aspect to consider, as it caused a lack of external stimulation. And as he had an unlimited access to several gadgets, this eventually led to lack of communication. My third case is a 10-year-old boy studying in government school was referred from Department of Neurology. He had a history of frequent headache in occipital region, precipitated whenever he gets angry, irritated, or frustrated, unprovoked anger outbursts, aggressive behavior, and constantly wanting to play a game on his phone. He also throws a lot of temper tantrums, fighting with the family if they are not letting him to play in the phone. Before lockdown began, he was a very playful child. He would love going out and playing with his friends. He would adjust well and quick in making new friends. He would enjoy outdoor games actually. After lockdown, he started using smartphone excessively. He would demand his parents to give his phone. If not, he would throw temper tantrums or yell angrily. His mother stated that the past 2 or 3 months, he has become more demanding, aggressive, and impulsive. Discussion: before lockdown, children had a structured routine. They were not in any constant supervision of their parents, and they are allowed some independence.
Yeah, I think you overshot your time, Dr. Miller.
Okay, sir.
What are the commonalities between these three cases? Because you have presented three cases. The first one looked like something different. The child was getting some images. The second one looked like just a case of, there was no sensory stimulation. Third one was little different. So what is the commonality between these three cases?
All three children who had no previous history of any complaints from their parents or schools, they did not have any previous history of any psychiatric complaints. The commonality is throwing temper tantrums, not talking to the parents, using smartphone excessively. These are the commonalities, and I put this as a case series because even normal things in the COVID context is taken out of context. So we did an IQ assessment, detailed evaluation for these patients, for these children, and we did not find any pathological symptoms in these patients. So I would say this is the normal thing for children to experience in the context of COVID law.
Now, were they all single children in their houses?
One of them had a sibling.
Okay. I don't think there's any time left to ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Karthikeyan?
That is, I think, the...
Good morning, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Good morning, sir.
Dr.
Am I
Karthik.
audible?
Yeah, please share your slide, Dr. Karthik.
Yes, sir. Sir, should I start, sir?
We can't see your slide, man.
Sir. 1 minute, sir. Shit.
No, you have 3 minutes. Okay. Go ahead, Karthik. Your time starts now.
Good morning, everyone. Today, my topic is sodium salt of valproic acid-induced hyperammonemia with normal liver function test, a case report. Sodium valproate is used in many neuropsychiatric conditions. It activates GABA receptor, causing additional potassium channels to open, leading to hyperpolarization. Side effects are hair loss, gingival hyperplasia, weight gain, tremors, and variation in liver functions. But fulminant hepatic failure is very rare, which may lead to sodium valproate-induced hyperammonemia, accounting for an incidence rate of 35 to 45%. 1% of hyperammonemia with normal liver function tests are seen. The prevalence of symptomatic hyperammonemia leading to encephalopathy from valproic acid are unknown, and it is called valproate-induced non-hepatic hyperammonemic encephalopathy. A male patient was admitted in the emergency department by his family members with complaints of sudden onset abnormal movements of all 4 limbs, lasting for 2 minutes, associated with loss of consciousness for 10 minutes, tongue bite, and urinary incontinence. This episode was followed by confusion, inability to identify family members, and irrelevant talk. He is a known case of seizure disorder and was prescribed divalproate sodium 750 mg by a neurophysician. Patient was started on injection lorazepam and supportive measures. Patient's investigations revealed that MRI brain, blood picture, ECG, serum electrolytes, LFT were within normal range. Patient's condition further deteriorated and developed illusions and hallucinations and another episode of seizure. EEG showed theta wave activity and slow wave pattern. Serum ammonia levels were done which were found to be high. Divalproate sodium was stopped. He was started on lactulose, low protein diet and tap rifaximin. His symptoms improved over the next 7 days and his ammonia levels dropped. He was changed to tap carbamazepine. Valproate VHE is an unusual complication characterized by variable presentations. One mechanism is sodium valproate metabolism, primarily by glucuronidation, secondary by beta oxidation via carnitine shuttle. This leads to increased sodium valproate bound to free carnitine and coenzyme A. This leads to prevention of beta oxidation of fatty acids into acetyl coenzyme A, which is also a substrate of N-acetyl glutamate, the required activator for initial enzyme in urea cycle. This increases ammonia levels, which crosses the blood-brain barrier. Ammonia, which gets metabolized by glutamate, synthase in astrocytes leads to increase in glutamine, causing astrocyte dysfunction and cerebral edema. In conclusion, VHE is not an uncommon or life-threatening if detected earlier. Hence, regular monitoring of serum ammonia level should be done by the physician, and the physician needs to have high index of suspicion when presented with seizure or altered sensorium. These are my references. Thank you.
What is the typical EEG picture you expect in hepatic encephalopathy, Karthik?
Slow wave pattern is, thank you for the question, sir.
Yeah.
Slow wave pattern is seen, sir.
Typically, actually, you should have triphasic waves, maybe in this case.
Yes, sir. Slow wave pattern with triphasic waves, sir.
And does it have any connection to the dose of valproate?
It is not with the dose of valproate, sir. It is with the prolonged use. There are chances. There is no proper correlation between dosage and chances of increased serum ammonia level, sir.
Would you re-challenge this patient with valproate? If other
We can
stabilizers don't work?
Yes, sir. We can re-challenge. One time we can re-challenge and check, sir. But further research needs to be done in regards to this because there is very limited research in this aspect, sir.
Any other question from the audience? Okay. Thank you, Karthik.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Next, Dr. Rini Moria, Siddhartha Medical College, Tumkur.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, madam.
Yes, sir. 1 minute, sir. Sir, slides are visible, sir.
Yes, we can see your slides now. Please go ahead.
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rini Moria, Junior Resident in Department of Psychiatry from Sri Siddhartha Medical College, Tumakuru.
Rini, just a minute, Marini. Can you switch on your video? We would like to know whether it is Rini or somebody else is presenting.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. 1 minute, sir.
Forensic person, sir.
Sir, actually, okay.
Your video is not working, is it? There you are. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rini Moria, Junior Resident in Department of Psychiatry from Sri Siddhartha Medical College. Today, I'll be presenting poster on rare presentation of psychotic symptoms in progressive supranuclear palsy. Progressive supranuclear palsy is a rare neurodegenerative extrapyramidal syndrome which affects 50 to 75 years of age group. It comprises of motor symptoms like postural instability with frequent falls, rigidity, bradykinesia or akinesia, vertical gaze palsy. It also involves cognitive function impairment, non-specific affective and behavioral disturbances which are very common. and rarely it causes frank psychosis or bipolar disorder. In early stage, PSP diagnosis can be confusing as psychiatric manifestations due to neurological and medical conditions, including PSP, are generally not typical and can lead to diagnostic challenges. So here is a case of a 58-year-old married female, educated up to 10th standard, homemaker, belongs to middle socioeconomic status, was presented to us in OPD with complaints of suspiciousness, anger, outburst, restlessness, hearing of voices not heard by others, decreased sleep with delusion of infidelity, reference and persecution, which was and pseudopsychosis from last 4-5 months. According to ICD-10, she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia late onset and was started on tablet olanzapine 5 mg, which gradually increased to 10 mg. After 5 days, tablet clonazepam 0.25 mg and tablet trihexyphenidyl 2 mg was started, following which her delusions were reduced within 3 to 4 months of starting treatment. After 8-9 months of psychotic symptoms, she came with complaints of frequent falls with difficulty in maintaining gait and slowness of movement. On neurological examination, axial rigidity was present, primitive reflex like glabellar tap was positive, bradykinesia with decreased arm swing and resting tremors of bilateral hand and tongue on protrusion was observed. On MRI, midbrain atrophy and cerebral atrophic changes were noted. On MMSC, her score was 18. Her blood investigation, CBC, LFT, RFT came out within normal limits. A neurologist consultation was sought for above finding, and she was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy and was started on tablet Syndopa, which is combination of levodopa and carbidopa, 125 milligrams, which started as OD, then BD, and switched to TDS. Tablet donepezil with memantine 2.5 mg was increased to 5 mg OD, and for her psychotic symptoms, tablet olanzapine was cross-coupled with aripiprazole. Currently, she reported significant improvement in psychotic symptoms and mild to moderate improvement in PSP symptoms. The novelty of this case report is rare presentation and importance of neurologists and psychiatrists to work as a teamwork in approaching the diagnosis as well as treatment in such cases and changing the diagnosis as the disease progresses. Coming to discussion, few cases of psychosis have been reported so far in the literature as the index cases. The chances of meeting PSP patients who are the first medical contact happens in psychiatric clinic. It is difficult to distinguish between Parkinson's disease and atypical Parkinsonian disorders as they are a distinct set of atypical features with movement problems. Although imaging techniques offer a variety of tools supporting the diagnosis of movement disorders, and diagnosis PSP is based upon the clinical symptoms and neurological examinations remains the gold standard for its definitive diagnosis as per the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke and the Society for PSP. Thank you. Here are my references. Hello?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can hear you, sir.
So what is actually the implication of your study? What do you want us to take home?
Sir, it's a case report where a middle-aged female presented to us initially with psychotic symptoms,
I'm
with
asking,
followed which.
No,
Yes,
what
sir.
are you trying to tell us? What is the implication? After looking through your study, what
Yes,
we
sir.
should know? Can you tell it in few words?
Sir, if the patient is coming with like psychotic symptom first episode in late age, period, like late age group, we should first see like suspect any organic causes which are the main like cause main reason for psychotic symptoms.
Okay.
So before in starting any antipsychotic, we should evaluate all the organic causes and then we should think about any psychiatric illness.
Right. Okay.
Sir, can I have a question to
Please
Chair?
go ahead. Please go ahead.
Could you establish that she is Dr. Rini by this video?
Recording is there, sir.
Recording is there, but how do you know she is Rini? Suppose the Lakshmi is there and says she is Rini.
You have to ask for Aadhaar card now.
One more step we have to go.
No, sir, if somebody, other contestant challenges, we can verify.
Yes.
Otherwise, somebody else presents.
Don't worry, Reni. This is not part of your thing.
Yes, sir, it's okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Madiha, Asha Hospital, Hyderabad.
Hello.
Shall I
You
start?
are originally scheduled to be online, is it? Because here
No.
it says online. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
A very good morning to the chairpersons and the jury members and the delegates. We all know dementia is an ever-increasing public mental health problem of old age. Among dementias, almost around 70% is contributed by Alzheimer dementia itself. So understanding the etiology at an very early stage, these biomarkers are helpful. So here myself, Dr. Madiha, I'm going to present a clinical study to see the association of ApoE and the cognitive functioning scores as well as MRI in patients of dementia. And we did this in Asha Memory Clinic. Total sample size is 44. They underwent cognitive assessment and then MRI dementia protocol and then brain ApoE, and the results are obtained. So the first tabular column shows the socio-demographic profile in the ApoE4 carriers and non-carriers, which is not showing much significant relation. And the second thing is showing the frequency of ApoE4 positivity, which shows almost about 22.7% positive. And in this slide, if you see this in ASR scores, there is a significant decline in ApoE4 carriers. And in when we see the each domains, visuospatial and memory shows a significant decline in the cognitive scorings in the ApoE4 carriers. And in MMSE scores as well as DSR scores also there is a significant decline in the ApoE4 carriers, and CDR scores it's non-specific. And with respect to the duration of dementia, it is showing non-specific relation with the ApoE4 carriers. And the neuroimaging scores, the mean temporal atrophy scores and global cortical atrophy score and CADAM score, which delineates the parietal lobe cortical atrophy, and FASICA score, which is delineating the frontal lobe atrophy. In all those things, the scores were high in ApoE4 carriers. So I would like to summarize my results. The percentage of ApoE4 in my study group is 22.7%. And I would say this ApoE4 carriers are strongly correlated with cognitive decline in A scores, and when it with respect to domains, memory and visuospatial scores were less. So I would like to conclude this ApoE4 carriers are strongly correlated with these changes. So more than one biomarker will increase the sensitivity and specificity in the diagnosis of dementia. And it does not influence the duration of disease. So the sample size is small, but other prospective dementia studies have also had lesser sample size. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems a good study. This, what you said is 77% is what?
ApoE4 non-carriers, sir. In my study group, 22.7% were positive ApoE4 carriers, sir.
And these people who are positive had more pathology than the people who are negative. That's what you're trying
Yes,
to
sir.
say.
It is significantly showing correlation with the cognitive scoring as well as the MRI dementia scoring, sir.
Right. So, in a clinical sense, what is the implication? What does it mean we should do?
What I wanted to suggest is like it is more than one biomarker. I used 3 biomarkers which will definitely increase the sensitivity and specificity of diagnosing dementia at an early stage. Right. Sooner the diagnosis, we can prevent further worsening of the disease.
Right.
And the progression of the dementia.
Any specific dementia or any dementia?
Any dementia, but 70% of dementia, even in our study group, is Alzheimer's dementia, sir.
Alzheimer's or mixed common?
Sir?
Is it mixed dementia is common or Alzheimer's dementia is common?
Alzheimer is the first and then mixed in my study group, sir.
Okay.
Any other question? Yes, sir.
ApoE estimation helps only in diagnosis, or does it help in even assessing severity?
Right now, we didn't go for the severity. Like it again needs a lot. This is a cross-sectional study, so we need more sample size to see the association of ApoE4 with severity, sir. So since it is a cross-sectional study,
he's not asking in your study. He's asking generally. Does it have also a relationship with illness severity? Is what is that?
Yes, sir. But the scores, like whenever the scores are reduced, like ApoE4 is positive, but again the values. That we need to see in further studies.
You had a question, sir? Please.
From your studies, through reading various articles before doing this research, have you found any correlation between the age of onset and the ApoE positivity?
Sir,
here we did, my patient samples are like more than 60 years of age, and in that less than 65 and after more than 65 I have used the sample, I have evaluated. So less than 65, there are only limited patients in my study. So my study is predominantly done for the late onset Alzheimer.
No, what he is asking again is, in the literature, does they have any correlation with age? So suppose somebody gets Alzheimer's early, are they more likely to be ApoE4 positive? Yes, sir.
No, I'm not. That's what I want to finish her presentation. I think that's a good question. Right now, I have about 268 sample. In the 268 sample, our positive, ApoE positive had earlier onset. In fact, the age of the patients, socio-demographically, and also the onset of the first symptoms and the progression seems to be different. But we are still analyzing it. Right now, I have about 256 PF.
Sir,
it's not part of the assessment.
I request the judges not to consider Prasad Rao's response in this regard, because you are evaluating the... No, let's... Thank you. Very good, ma. Please publish the article, because it has a good value of amount.
Thank you, sir.
Look for anticipation. That's basically what the question was. The next.
D. Virendra, Andhra Medical College.
Dr. D. Virendra? Yeah. Can you share the slides, please?
Hello.
You are audible and the slides are also visible. Go ahead. You can start now.
Good morning, one and all. I am Dr. Virendra, second year PG from Andhra Medical College, and today my poster is a case report of schizophrenia with moderate intellectual disability with oculocutaneous albinism. Introduction. Albinism is a type of congenital hypopigmentary disease which occurs as a result of deficiency in the production of melanin pigment. And the case summary is a 23-year-old male, unmarried, Telugu speaking, unemployed, hailing from Vijayanagaram, belonging to lower socioeconomic status, presented with chief complaints of muttering to self, beating self, then vamping behavior, aggressive behavior like beating others and breaking household articles, poor personal hygiene, and decreased sleep since past 4 months. No past history of significant medical illness or psychiatric illness. Reportedly, patient used to be isolated since childhood, never used to play with his sisters or others. He had difficulty in learning things since childhood, used to cry frequently with temper tantrums. When he was given money to buy something, he didn't even ask for change in return. Used to roam aimlessly in the village since childhood, but able to brush teeth, bath, and eat on his own. He is born out of a consanguineous marriage, second in birth order out of 3 siblings, with a family history of albinism in younger sister. No family history of any psychiatric illness, or no history of any substance abuse or epilepsy and head injury or fever with altered sensorium. On general examination, patient was found to be an albino male with complete depigmentation of skin, hair, and eyes, with hyperpigmented and hyperkeratotic lesions over forearm, scalp, and face and upper back. With on mental status examination, patient is unkempt and rapport could be established with difficulty with fleeting eye contact, normal speech with normal productivity, but thought revealing delusion of persecution secondary to auditory hallucinations, and the perception having second and third person auditory hallucinations with irritable and labile and inappropriate affect. Investigations on routine blood test, low platelet count was found in complete blood picture, and thyroid profile revealing low CRP-SH levels with abnormal LFT showing low SGOT and SGPT levels. And on ophthalmoscopic and ophthalmology findings, reduced visual acuity with refractive errors of both eyes. On slit lamp examination, bilateral nystagmus with fundoscopy revealing albinotic fundus with no foveal reflex. On skin biopsy, it revealed actinic keratosis, which is a precursor of squamous cell carcinoma. On psychometry, on IQ assessment test, his IQ was found to be 48, suggestive of moderate intellectual disability. On Rorschach test findings were found to be schizophrenic profile. And the patient was immediately admitted into hospital with diagnosis of schizophrenia and later referred to psychologist for IQ assessment. and was diagnosed with moderate intellectual disability too. And the patient was immediately started on risperidone and sodium valproate, and doses were titrated accordingly. And as per dermatologist's opinion, he is having high risk of to develop this squamous cell carcinoma with very poor prognosis, and advised to avoid sun exposure. And ophthalmology department suggested that ocular damage is permanent and nothing can be done, and only glasses can be prescribed to correct the refractive errors. And these are my references. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Virendra. Are you trying to say that there is some genetic linkage between schizophrenia and albinism?
Sir, studies are ongoing, sir. Actually, sir, in 1965, this schizophrenia melanosis theory was proposed, sir, in which, according to that, schizophrenia should be an protective factor, sir, actually, against this. Albinism should be a protective factor against schizophrenia, sir. But later, many case reports were found that albinism could coexist along with schizophrenia. As per recent studies, sir, schizophrenia is thought to be having genetic linkage with chromosomal abnormalities 11q and 15q, sir. And in albinism also, 11q gene is the important for tyrosinase gene, sir.
Right. Is there any, how many people with schizophrenia have albinism? Any percentage is there in the literature?
No, not exactly, sir.
Prevalence of albinism in schizophrenia, is there any literature?
No, sir. No, sir, no, sir.
Okay. Any other question? All right. Thank you, man.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Nikhil George K. Jubilee Mission Medical College, Thrissur. Yes, Dr. Nikhil, please share your slide.
Yes, sir. Good morning, respected delegates. My topic is post-stroke depressive disorder and disability, a cross-sectional observational study. I am Dr. Nikhil from Jubilee Mission Medical College. Introduction. Depression is a common psychiatric consequence of stroke with quoted rates of post-stroke depression ranging from 18 to 61%. Decrease of mortality in post-stroke patients would mean increase in the number of people living with disabilities following stroke. The degree of disability in depressed post-stroke patients will allow us to understand the contribution of handicap towards depression. This can help to reduce the burden of depression in them, whereby we can improve the overall health. Coming to the aim of study, to study the relationship between post-stroke depression and disability. Secondly, to study the relationship between socio-demographic factors and post-stroke depression. The methods used, it was a cross-sectional observational study. 135 consecutive stroke patients satisfying inclusion and exclusion criteria who came to neurology OP in a tertiary center were evaluated with MINI-Plus, ICD-10 and DCR criteria. The patients were assessed by using modified ranking scale MRS for disability. Statistical tools were applied and correlation between depression in stroke and disability were evaluated. To explain modified ranking scale, 0 scoring is for no symptoms at all, 1 is for no significant disability despite symptoms, 2 is slight disability but able to look after own affairs but not all previous activities. Score 3 is moderate disability, able to walk without assistance, and score 4 is moderately severe disability, unable to walk without assistance, unable to attend bodily needs without assistance. I have used chi-square test and to calculate the significance and p-value less than 0.05 was considered significant. Pearson correlation coefficient was also used to evaluate the correlation between the disability from stroke and post-stroke depression. Inclusion criteria: patients diagnosed with ischemic infarct stroke by neurologist and confirmed by CT imaging. Onset of stroke within 6 months. Age 40 years and above. Exclusion criteria: patients diagnosed with psychiatric disorders before the onset of stroke. 2. Diagnosed with other neurological disorders before the onset of stroke. 3. History of head injury. 4. Delirium, unable to comprehend. 5. With aphasia. 6. Patients with hemorrhagic stroke. 6. And patients who are not consenting were excluded. Results: out of 135 patients diagnosed with stroke, 25 were having major depressive episode, which is 18.5%. Among those 25, 56% were aged above 60 years. No significant difference in socioeconomic status were noted. 64% of depressed were males, 60% had right-sided stroke. 49 of 135, that is 36%, had MRS score more than or equal to 3, meaning more disability. Mean MRS score was although 2.4. Among the depressed, 64% had disability score more than or equal to 3. The p-value was 0.001, which was less than 0.05 and hence taken to be significant. The correlation between MRS score and major depressive disorder was positive but weak as per Pearson correlation value, which was 0.273. I have given a graph of MRS distribution of depressed patients showing MRS score 3 with a total sample of 12 people satisfying MRS score 3. Conclusion: 18.5% of patients, 25 out of 135, satisfied criteria for major depressive episode. Out of them, 16 had MRS score more than or equal to 3, suggesting higher degree of disability and dependence in depressed patients. Test of significance also proved the above findings. This emphasizes on the need for more interventions to limit the disability. It also points at the need for more and more psychiatric interventions in these patients. That's my reference.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil. It's a very good study.
Thank you, sir.
Prevalence, what is the literature-wise prevalence of depression in stroke?
Sir, it is ranging from 18 to 60%, sir.
So you are at the lower end of, what you have found is at the lower end of the spectrum, isn't it?
Yes, sir, 18.5%.
Do you think there's any possible reason why you have got lower end?
Sir, one of the reason is that I have excluded patients who had aphasia, and aphasia is definitely a more risk factor for depression. So maybe that, and ours is a tertiary center, sir. So socioeconomic factors might also be involved.
This 18 to this percentage, what you're talking about, is an ischemic stroke or includes hemorrhagic stroke also?
Ischemic stroke only, sir.
Ischemic stroke only?
Yes.
No. I'm talking about the literature, what you quoted.
Yes, sir.
Yours,
So
not asking yours.
yes, that too is only for ischemic stroke, sir.
Stroke only. Okay.
It is ranging from 18 to 60%, 60, sir.
Right. Because I remember it being slightly higher, that's why I'm asking. No problem. It's a very good study. Are you trying to publish this?
Yes, sir. I'm trying to publish this, sir.
Good. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Next one. Dr. Inia, Madurai Medical College. Look, let's give a round of applause at least so that the people who are sleeping will wake up.
Pleasant morning to one and all present here. I'm Dr. Inia from Madurai Medical College here to present a poster about a case of mania with cerebellar infarct. Starting with the introduction, secondary mania resulting from cerebral cortex infarct are described more commonly, but which produced by cerebellar lesions are not commonly reported. Clinical and with imaging studies report that dysregulation of the cerebral network occurs consequent to a cerebellar lesion, which are more observed in the affective disorder. We are all very well known that cerebellum is more commonly involved in control of the motor functions and the equilibrium. Studies have started to focus about its role also in the affect and behavioral regulation. As I have quoted in the reference, mainly lesions involving in the posterior lobule 6, 7A and 9 and posterior vermis are involved in regulating the affect and behavior. It was Schwarzman who coined the specific setup syndrome, which is known as cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, who described the role of mood and behavior and cerebellum. Coming to methodology, a 49 years old male reported with complaints of sleep disturbances, disrobing clots, anger outbursts, talk lines, suspiciousness for 20 days. He was diagnosed to have diabetes and hypertension for 1 year and he was on irregular treatment. Alcohol intake was present for 20 years and last intake from the day of admission was 10 days back. On examination, patient was dwarf, bilateral mild withdrawal tremors were present in hands. Impairment of cerebellar functions on the left side was noted, which was manifested as ataxia, difficulty in tandem walking and dysdiadokinesia. On mental status examination, psychomotor activity was increased, his talk was excessive and spontaneous, thought showed ideas of persecution and inflated self-esteem, and his mood was elated and irritable at times. Affect was also increased in range and reactivity. Higher mental functions showed, attention was aroused, but he was distractible. Then orientation was intact, abstract thinking and judgment was impaired, insight was absent. Routine blood and urine investigations were found to be normal. Bender-Chester test showed signs of organicity, and YMIR score was 30 out of 60. Results showed he was diagnosed as alcohol-induced psychotic disorder, manic symptoms. Later, MRI showed lacunar infarct in the posterior-inferior aspect of the left cerebellar hemisphere, following which neurologist opinion was obtained. In addition to mood stabilizers and antipsychotics, he was started on aspirin and atorvastatin. Diagnosis was revised as left cerebellar infarct with organic mood disorder mania. On follow-up, he was on mood stabilizers, currently abstinent with the cerebellar signs reduced in intensity. Since he has mild truncal hyperpulsion, he is not able to go for work. Conclusion, mania with alcohol-dependent 49 years male with cerebellar signs found to have cerebellar infarct in MRI brain was re-diagnosed as organic mood disorder secondary to cerebellar infarct. Cerebellar stroke comes to about 10% of all the strokes, and as per statistics, it's most often missed. This case makes us rethink that all the cerebellar signs and alcohol dependence cannot be taken as alcohol-induced cerebellar damage. And first episode mania in an elderly patient, we should think about the CNS pathology. And various studies of late have brought out the involvement of cerebellum in affective disorders. These are my references. Thank you all.
Can this cerebellar infarct is a coincidental finding?
Sir, there are chances, sir. It can also be a coincidental finding, sir. But here...
What is the mechanism of this cerebellar infarct causing mania?
Sir, actually cerebellar infarct causes degeneration of the Purkinje cell from where the output arises through the various part of the subcortical circuits, which includes limbic region, hippocampus, amygdala, temporal lobe, and also frontostriatothalamic circuits. If the output is damaged, there are more chances for the patient to be presented with mood symptoms also, sir.
The Purkinje fibers fine. How does it affect mood?
Sir, the fibers from...
Okay, cerebellar place there is infarct. I agree with you. Purkinje cells, fibers have degenerated. Now tell me, how does it cause mania? Which part of limbic system?
Now, what is the overall role of the cerebellum in effect?
Sir, mainly posterior vermis and the posterior part of the cerebellum as per the
Now,
studies.
what do they do on effect? So the overall role of the cerebellum is actually only modulation. Isn't it? They do not really cause anything. And there is, I don't know whether you know about it, but there is something called as a cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, which has been described, which is little more of inappropriate effect rather than mania as such. So the people, the ability to demonstrate proper effect goes away. So there becomes inappropriateness. So that's why he is asking all these questions.
Okay, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So the last batsman, Dr. Aditya.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Aditya from Institute of Mental Health, Hyderabad. My case is lethal suicide attempt and multiple suicide tendencies in a female with epilepsy. Coming to the introduction, illness is the second most common cause of suicide after family problems. Suicide rate among epileptic patients is up to 5 times higher than in general population. Around 50 million people live with epilepsy globally, and out of them, 1/5 of population reside in India, and suicide is the final outcome of complex interactions of biological and genetics, physiological, sociological, and environmental factors. There are less studies regarding the epilepsy and suicidal tendencies in India. And this is the case. She has come at the age of 40 with history of first seizure activity at the age of 8 years, and with recurrent history of seizures lasting for 2 to 3 minutes with intense headache, and episodes for 3 to 4 episodes sometimes in a day, and 3 to 4 in a week, and later on drop out from school due to recurrent seizure episodes at the age of 8th class, and later on she committed a lethal suicide attempt by burning with kerosene, and followed by multiple suicidal tendencies leading to the severe contractures of both hands. And she got proper treatment at the age of 24 years due to ignorance of her father, and she presented at the age of first time to the psychiatric hospital at the age of 40 years with affective disturbances. And the risk factors found were chronic epilepsy, improper treatment, and intense fear of headache and seizures, incapacitation due to illness, unmarried status, lack of social support, and poor quality of life. Challenges I found was stigma, ignorance of family members, and undiagnosed mental illness. There was clear-cut lack of referral services. Suicidal behavior in most person is related to chronic and several physical disease and mental illness, underlying mental illness. And Jones et al. Found 20.3% of epilepsy in children, and we found significant multiple suicidal tendencies in our case. The risk also increases with untreated epilepsy and undiagnosed depression as well. As in this case, due to poor support and ignorance of family members, the complaints I couldn't assure. And a chronic illness is in itself depressing and burdensome. As epilepsy is chronic debilitating condition, the appropriate treatment would have saved her life. And I recommend awareness about psychiatric comorbidities from the onset of chronic illness such as epilepsy, and early screening and referral services to a psychiatrist is needed, which was lacked here, and proper psychoeducation to family members regarding medications available and what are the services available to the patients. Thank you.
What was the epilepsy she was suffering from?
Sir?
Which type of epilepsy?
Sir, as this is, I studied from retrospective. From the records, it was noted as generalized tonic-clonic seizures.
Okay. It's a file review. You have not seen the patient.
I have seen the patient, and they have very less records available then because of his father, who is homeopathic doctor, and he was hesitant to take proper treatment in the initial years, so that she was suffered a lot, and she used to have severe headache daily, and that father used all types of medications available with him, and slowly later on with other family members insist, she has turned to a neurologist, and after 10 years, her seizures decreased.
What was the seizures?
Generalized tonic-clonic seizures, sir.
EEG evidence is there?
Sir?
Is there a EEG which has been done?
Not available, sir. I couldn't see with them.
Do you know whether there is more association of psychiatric morbidity with what kind of seizure?
Mesial temporal epilepsy.
That's why exactly we are asking the question.
Yes, sir, but I couldn't find it. And a clear-cut lack of services was there, sir. This is the first time they have come as a last resort. Until then, she was kept in rehab centers. She was.
Suppose you assume that there is mesial temporal sclerosis, what are the other behavioral changes you would want?
Violent anger outbursts.
Really? Chronic mesial temporal sclerosis, what are the changes you observe in personality?
Have you heard about Gestalt-Gestwitz syndrome?
Yes, sir.
That is what sir is asking. Okay, last question. Difference between GTCS and CPS? Generalized tonic-clonic seizure and complex partial seizure. What is the difference?
Motor.
Both of them will have, no?
Yes, sir.
So what is the difference between generalized tonic-clonic seizure and complex partial seizures?
Sorry, sir. I can't remember right now.
Okay, you can't remember. This is the last case. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Organizers, over to you.
Thank you, doctors. Dr. Suresh Badamat, your sense of humor kept the audience little more attentive. Thank you, sir. Now it's time to honor. I invite Dr. Arun Kumar to honor the chairpersons. Those are the paintings of Dr. Arun Kumar. For your kind info, sir. I would like to invite Dr. Kiran Kumar to the dais. Sir, we missed you yesterday due to flight delay. Kindly accept a honor today. I have one more person to welcome. I welcome Dr. H. Chandrasekhar, HOD, Bangalore Medical College, to the dais. Dr. Arun Kumar is pleased to honor his teacher, Dr. H. Chandrasekhar, with his paintings. Kindly accept his token of love, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.